She pushed open the creaking, cast-iron gate in the fence that surrounded the house. It banged shut behind her as she walked up to the front door. Thick clumps of lilacs hung over the doorway. The air was laden with their suffocating, sweet odor. Rosalind lifted the heavy brass knocker and then let it fall. A hollow thump echoed inside the house. A few seconds later, the door opened. "Rosalind, it is you, isn't it? You're so grown up I hardly recognize you." Then she was smothered in the lilac-perfumed embrace of her aunt. "Hello, Aunt Harriet." "Come inside, dear, out of this humidity. The house always stays cool inside." Rosalind followed into a large, dark hallway that was as cool as an underground cave. "Here you are, finally visiting me after 16 years. How was your train ride?" But Aunt Harriet didn't wait for an answer. She chattered on. "I've been after your father to let you come for years. Well, it isn't any secret that your father didn't like my husband, is it? But now that dear Arthur has been dead for 4 years..." Aunt Harriet paused and then sighed. "It has been 4 long years since Arthur killed himself." Rosalind stared down at her feet. She didn't know what to say. Her mother had warned her that Aunt Harriet might be a little strange, and she was right. "This is an enormous house, Aunt Harriet," Rosalind finally said. "I'll take you on a tour once you've had time to unpack. Now you must want to see your bedroom."
"See your bedroom,"
a strange voice croaked out. "Who was that?" Rosalind asked uneasily. Aunt Harriet laughed with her high, tittering laugh and walked over to the end of the hallway. She pulled off a green velvet cover, revealing a large parrot in a cage. "That was Polly, wasn't it, Polly?" Aunt Harriet made bird noises to the parrot. Rosalind did not approach the bird cage. She hated parrots. "Aunt Harriet, I think I'll go to my room now. If you could show me where it is?" "Of course, Rosalind. I'll be right back, Polly." Aunt Harriet led the way up a curved flight of stairs leading to the second floor. "First, I want to show you your Uncle Arthur's study and laboratory. Arthur was a great scientist, you know. He was just ahead of his time. The people at the university were jealous of his superiority. Really, that was the only reason he had to leave and carry on his experiments here at home." They had walked into a huge book-lined room. Rosalind looked around it in awe. So this was where Uncle Arthur worked. She had always known he was a scientist, but her father refused to talk about his work. She knew there had been some sort of scandal, and Uncle Arthur had been dismissed from his university post. "And through this door," Aunt Harriet said as she walked on, "is his laboratory." The next room was even more awesome. It was filled with labeled jars of chemicals, test tubes, and other scientific equipment. "What exactly did Uncle Arthur study?" Rosalind asked. "He was a biologist, a great biologist," Aunt Harriet said in a reverent tone. "He studied human mutations." "Oh," Rosalind said. She looked around the walls. There were pictures of apes and monkeys hanging beside photographs of human bodies. "You understand, don't you, Rosalind, that you mustn't touch anything in these 2 rooms. They are a monument to my husband's greatness. Someday science will come to understand his genius. These rooms must be preserved exactly as they are." "Yes, Aunt Harriet," Rosalind said as she followed her aunt back through the study and into the hallway again. "The rest of the house you can explore on your own, Rosalind," Aunt Harriet said. "But I want to make one thing very clear to you. Aunt Harriet's voice hardened. I never want you to go up into the attic. Do you understand that?
Understand that?
The parrot mimicked from the next room. I'm very serious, Rosalind. Never open the door that leads to the attic, or you'll be sorry.
You'll be sorry.
Polly croaked. Rosalind felt a strange sensation come over her. I understand, Aunt Harriet, she promised. Aunt Harriet walked down to the room at the end of the hall. Here is your room, Rosalind. I hope you like it. It used to be my sitting room when I first married. Rosalind peeked inside. The entire room was done in lilac. The bedspread was bright lilac. The wallpaper was a design of pale lilac flowers on white. And even the furniture was painted the shade of lilac. Oh, Aunt Harriet. Oh, Aunt Harriet. That was all Rosalind could think of to say. You get yourself settled in, Rosalind, dear. Then come down and we'll have some tea together. 20 minutes later, Rosalind came down the curving staircase to join her aunt for tea. Aunt Harriet was waiting in a sunlit room off the main hallway. Tea and cake were already sitting out on a small table by the sofa. Have some delicious cake, Rosalind. It's so nice to have company. Polly and I have to eat alone usually, don't we, Polly?
Alone,
croaked Polly. The parrot's cage had been set by the window. Rosalind ate some of the cake and sipped some of the tea. Her eyes slowly surveyed the room. The furnishings were very old-fashioned. The lamps had crystal beads hanging from the shades. Old velvet cloths, edged with fringe, were thrown over the chairs. Little statues and knickknacks and pictures were everywhere. One picture, in particular, caught Rosalind's eyes. Is that my cousin Herman? She asked. Aunt Harriet made a choking sound in her throat. I'm sorry, Aunt Harriet. That was rude of me. Rosalind blushed. She knew that Aunt Harriet must feel awful about losing her son Herman when he was so young. And Uncle Arthur had killed himself just a month later. Rosalind tried to make up for upsetting her aunt. You know, Aunt Harriet, I always wished I had known Herman. We were born the same year. I cried so hard when I heard that he had died, even though we never met. Aunt Harriet had regained her composure. Yes, dear. That is a picture of Herman. Now, let's not talk about the past. Rosalind spent the next days wandering about the house, leafing through the old books she found and sitting out in the garden at night with her aunt. Aunt Harriet asked a lot of questions about Rosalind's father and mother, but she changed the subject whenever Rosalind asked more about her cousin Herman. The time passed pleasantly enough for Rosalind, but after a few days she became restless. There was no one else to talk to but Aunt Harriet. Rosalind was ready for something to break the tedium. The fourth day she was there, Aunt Harriet announced that she was going to a friend's house for afternoon tea. Rosalind could come along if she wanted. Rosalind thought it over and decided she would probably be bored. She told her aunt she would stay home by herself and perhaps go into the garden and read. When her aunt left, Rosalind went up to her room and tried to read a novel she had brought along. But the novel didn't interest her. After a few minutes, she slammed the book shut. She got up and went out into the hallway. There was nothing she could think of to do. Her vacation had turned out to be quite the disappointment. As she walked down the hallway, she passed the door that she knew led up to the attic. She paused in front of it. Aunt Harriet had acted very strangely about her going into the attic. Rosalind wondered what could be up there. probably a lot of old clothes that Aunt Harriet didn't want her to get into. Or maybe there were other family photographs that her aunt didn't want to have to talk about. Rosalind put her hand on the doorknob. To her surprise, it turned. But then she shook her hand away. Aunt Harriet had warned her, almost threatened her, not to go up there. She started to walk away, but her curiosity about the attic made her stop. Aunt Harriet was a little crazy. There was probably no reason in the world why she shouldn't go up there. Making up her mind, Rosalind put her hand on the doorknob again and turned it. As she pushed the door open, it stuck for a moment, but then swung open. A short flight of stairs led up to the attic. Rosalind walked up them slowly. As her eyes reached the level of the attic floor, she saw something that brought her to a dead halt. She stared at the thing, the half-human, half-animal thing, staring back at her. Then she let out an awful scream and scrambled back down the attic stairs. Rosalind felt sick. She couldn't believe what she had just seen. It didn't make any sense. It was some monstrous, living thing such as she had never seen before. She pushed open the attic door and ran to the stairway. Then she heard what she had feared. Steps were coming down the attic stairs behind her, the steps of that thing. For a moment, Rosalind's knees gave out. She tried to run away as she saw the thing come onto the hall landing, but she couldn't. The awful creature came nearer. It reached out a fur-covered arm, and Rosalind ran. She ran down the steps, nearly falling. The thing came after her. She could hear it making short, snorting sounds as it breathed. Rosalind ran into the living room. Then she realized in a second that there was no way out of the room. She dashed for the door again, just barely missing the thing's outstretched arm. She ran down the hallway to the kitchen. The thing lumbered after her. She tried to get its face out of her mind. It was the face, the strangely human face, that bothered her most. She ran through the kitchen to the back door to the garden. Too late, she realized that the garden also was a dead end. Rosalind pressed her back up against the stone garden wall. The thing came out of the back door and shuffled toward her. She saw its ugly face spread wide in a smile. She screamed and darted to one side. Again, she just escaped its outstretched arm. But now it was close behind her. Rosalind ran through the kitchen and into the hallway, but she didn't make it to the front door. She stumbled and fell. The thing came and stood over Rosalind. It reached its furry arm down to her and tapped her on the head.
Tag, you're it.
The parrot croaked from its cage. Rosalind fainted. When she came to, the thing's face was still hovering over her, but beside it was Aunt Harriet's face. Rosalind, you naughty girl. What did I tell you about going into the attic? I said you would be sorry. Aunt Harriet was shaking her finger at Rosalind. You've got poor Herman all nervous now.
Poor Herman,
the parrot repeated. Yes, poor Herman, Aunt Harriet said, stroking her son's head. He has never been the same since Arthur's last experiment. Then, Aunt Harriet looked down at Rosalind again. You do realize, Rosalind, that we can't let you go now. Not now that you know our secret. I'll have to call your parents and tell them that you never arrived here. And we can arrange a nice room for her in the attic. Can't we, Herman? Rosalind looked up into her mad aunt's face. Then she looked at her cousin. An eager grin was spread across Herman's ugly face. "You'll be very happy here with us, Rosalind," Aunt Harriet said.
Very happy.
The parrot croaked. Rosalind screamed, and then she fainted away again. Herman picked up her limp body and started carrying it up the staircase to the attic door. Mr. Peebles pushed aside the curtain of glass beads that hung over the entrance to the fortune teller's chamber. He walked inside. Behind him, the beads swung back together with a clatter. Mr. Peebles was alone in the chamber. He sat down on a chair and surveyed the room. Red and black silk curtains hung all around the walls, alternating in color. The floor was covered with brightly designed Persian carpets. Mr. Peebles looked up. Painted on the black ceiling were symbols and pictures which he had never seen before. An eerie blue light shone throughout the room. Mr. Peebles put his hands on his knees and waited. His wife had told him that he would have to wait. It was his wife, in fact, who had persuaded Mr. Peebles to come to the fortune teller. He himself was far too reasonable a man to be interested in hocus-pocus like this, but his wife was a persuasive woman. The swishing sounds of silk against silk made Mr. Peebles look up. The fortune teller had entered the chamber. She was a large woman with long black hair. Her costume was flamboyant. The red full dress was adorned with necklaces, bangles, and a silver belt which had a clasp designed of two intertwined snakes' heads. "You are Mr. Peebles." The fortune teller announced this as a fact, not a question. Yes, I am," Mr. Peebles stammered, suddenly flustered by the presence of this overwhelming woman. "Take my hand and come to the table." The woman reached a heavily bangled arm out at Mr. Peebles. He drew his arm out to her and she clutched his hand tightly, almost fiercely. She led him over to one corner of the room where a round table sat. 2 chairs were arranged around it, opposite from each other. "Sit down, Mr. Peebles, and we shall begin." Mr. Peebles stumbled into the chair to which the fortune teller pointed and sat down. His eyes were riveted on the crystal ball which sat in the dead center of the round table. He looked at it with a mixture of amusement and fear. The chamber was much as he had expected. It contained all the typical furnishings and paraphernalia of the fortune teller. And yet, he was uneasy here. His common sense was disturbed by the presence of this woman, who already exerted a magnetic influence over him. "Look into my eyes, Mr. Peebles." The fortune teller's voice was strong and suggestive. Mr. Peebles obeyed. "You have suffered a great misfortune, haven't you, Mr. Peebles?" she said, staring deep into his eyes. "Yes, that's right," Mr. Peebles began. "You lost the job you had for 20 years. Is that right, Mr. Peebles?" Now it seemed that the fortune teller could see behind his eyes, into his brain. "How did you know?" he asked dreamily. "I know," the fortune teller replied, "and I know more. You fear death, don't you, Mr. Peebles? You feel the hand of death tightening around your neck." At that moment, Mr. Peebles' neck did seem to be choked by an invisible hand. He began to pour out what had been haunting him these past months. "Yes, I fear death, yes. I feel that life has passed me by and all that is left for me is death." "Poor Mr. Peebles," The fortune teller's voice went on soothingly. "Let me consult the crystal ball." The fortune teller led Mr. Peebles' gaze from her eyes down to the crystal ball. It radiated an intense blue light, the eerie blue glow that Mr. Peebles had noticed in the room earlier. The fortune teller began to drone a rhythmic chant as she stared into the crystal ball. Then, suddenly, she sucked in her breath. Mr. Peebles shifted his eyes from the crystal ball to her face. Her eyes were burning, and the black brows were knit together. "I see doom before you, Mr. Peebles. What this crystal ball has told me is not pleasant. It gives a black picture of your family. Death." Her words were drowned out by Mr. Peebles' shriek of despair. His fears had been right. Death was stalking him. He felt the fortune teller's fingers entwine in his. "Mr. Peebles, Mr. Peebles, we all must die. You must simply accept it and provide for your loved ones." Mr. Peebles came out of his reverie. Loved ones. Yes, he must provide for his beloved wife, Margaret. His darling Margaret. Mr. Peebles left the fortune teller's chamber in a daze. He stumbled from the dark room, penetrated by the eerie blue light, out into the darker blackness of the winter night. As he drove his car home, he made himself a promise. No matter what came to him and how soon, he would take care of Margaret. Margaret was standing in the hallway, waiting for him when he arrived home. To a stranger, they may have appeared to be father and daughter. She was, in fact, 20 years younger than her husband. "Margaret, it's awful. She said just what I feared." Mr. Peebles poured out his experience with the fortune teller to his wife. She listened to his story, stroking his balding head with her soft hands. "Margaret, I promise you will be cared for. Do not worry. I plan to take out a $100,000 life insurance policy." "Whatever you want, dear. But stop this horrible talk of death. I won't hear it anymore. You laughed when I first suggested that you go to a fortune teller, and now you take her silly predictions so seriously." Mr. Peebles felt better after that. He and his wife went to bed. The first thing Mr. Peebles did the next morning was visit his insurance broker. Despite the broker's advice to the contrary, he insisted that he take out a new insurance policy immediately. The beneficiary would be, of course, his wife. Mr. Peebles felt much better as he drove home from the insurance office, despite the meaning of what he had just done. He fell into a daydream about Margaret, how she could always keep the house and live as she did now. There was a sudden screeching sound, and Mr. Peebles' foot trembled on the brake pedal. The train engine flashed before him, followed by a constant whiz of boxcars. Their rumbling wheels on the track kept time with Mr. Peebles' pounding heart. The fortune teller had been right about death. He had just barely escaped it. When he got home, Mr. Peebles told his wife about the train. She lay down on the couch and sobbed. To comfort her, he brought out the insurance policy. He kept repeating to her how he had made sure that she would always be protected. That afternoon, Mr. Peebles went out into the garage where he did small projects with wood to keep himself busy. Now he needed to get his mind off the morning incident with the train. He cleaned off the work table area, putting tools back in their proper drawers. There seemed to be a knife he had misplaced. He rummaged through more drawers. Then he reached up to a cabinet high above the table. As he pulled the door open, the missing knife fell from the cabinet ledge. Its sharp blade plunged down an inch away from his terrified eyes. The knife dug into the wooden workbench and vibrated from the force of its impact. Mr. Peebles backed away in horror. There was a death jinx on him. Mr. Peebles spent the rest of the afternoon lying on the couch in his study. He was paralyzed with fear. Death's bony hand seemed to be tightening its grip around his neck. He refused the dinner his wife brought him. He refused even to talk with her. Finally, in the late evening, he felt that he must get out of the house. He decided to take a walk along a deserted road near the house. He would be safe there. No traffic was allowed on that path. "Margaret," he called out to his wife, "I think I'll take a long walk on Old Mill Road. I'll be a while. Please don't wait up." Margaret came into the room and watched her husband dress for his walk. "You'll be careful, won't you? Remember what the fortune teller said." "Yes, I'll be careful, Margaret." Mr. Peebles kissed his wife's lips. "I'll see you later," he said as he went out the door. Margaret waited until she heard the door shut. Then, with a smile on her face, she walked over to the telephone. Along the path that was once the Old Mill Road, Mr. Peebles shuffled his feet through the dead autumn leaves. He let memories of his life drift in and out of his mind. It seemed so peaceful here on the path. Mr. Peebles began to think that the fortune teller could be wrong. Then, he was blinded by two headlights. Speeding toward him, straight down the middle of the path, was a huge car. He knew immediately that this was the end. Death had him in a stranglehold at last. Mr. Peebles stared at death as it bore down on him. In the seconds before he died, he saw the face that death wore. It was the face of the fortune teller behind the wheel of the car, and on the dashboard in front of her was the crystal ball. The stuffed dog sat on a low table in the darkest corner of the study. It was a black boxer with short, bristly hair that was still sleek. Mrs. Heathcote dusted it every week and rubbed oil into its hair every month. She took good care of the boxer in remembrance of her husband, the late Mr. Heathcote. He and the dog had died on the same day, 20 years ago. The dog had been devoted to Mr. Heathcote, and his wife liked to think that it had died out of grief at its master's death. The coroner, however, didn't find that a satisfactory explanation. Mr. Heathcote, you see, had died a very mysterious death, and when the boxer died the same day, the coroner had naturally been very suspicious. He ordered an autopsy of both bodies, Mr. Heathcote's and the dog's. But no medical cause for either death had been determined. Mrs. Heathcote buried her husband and had the boxer stuffed. It had sat in that corner of the study for 20 years. Except, that is, on one day of each year, the anniversary of Mr. Heathcote's death. On that day, Mrs. Heathcote would lift the stuffed dog in her arms, carry him to the car, and drive with him beside her on the front seat to the cemetery. There, she would lay the dog on top of her husband's grave. She would smile to herself, imagining that the three of them were all together again. This year, Mrs. Heathcote had asked her grandson Theodore to help her carry the dog to the cemetery. She had been having back trouble, and the stuffed dog was quite heavy. Theodore was 12. He had never met his grandfather, and he didn't understand why his grandmother took the stuffed animal to the cemetery every year. But, at his mother's insistence, he agreed to spend this weekend with his grandmother. He arrived early Saturday morning, the day of the pilgrimage to the cemetery. "Teddy, you're so grown up," Mrs. Heathcote said as she squeezed Theodore up against her, just as she had always done. Theodore drew away from his grandmother. He noticed that his glasses had become smeared by something on her apron. As he pulled out his handkerchief and started to clean them, he said, "Don't call me Teddy." "Oh, yes, Theodore. I'll try to remember," Mrs. Heathcote said apologetically. "Now, come along and help me with the dear doggy. It looks like it may rain today, so we must be off to the cemetery right away." Theodore followed his grandmother into the house. He began to wish he hadn't let his mother persuade him to come. As he walked into the study, he felt the revulsion creep into his body. It was the same revulsion he had always felt toward this room. He despised the stuffed dog. As a child, he had been locked in this room once by his grandmother as punishment. He had sat in the room in the slowly fading light until it was pitch black. And during that whole time, the stuffed dog had stared at him with its beady eyes. He remembered how the cruel snarl on the dog's lips had haunted him in nightmares for weeks afterwards. He remembered how the dog had filled him with a sinister feeling of fear. It was dead, and yet it seemed so not dead. "Teddy, I mean Theodore, pick the dog up," his grandmother said. Theodore walked over to the dog, but the idea of touching it made him sick. "Really, Theodore, we must hurry. Lift the dog from the table." Theodore put his hands on the stuffed dog. Its greasy fur felt unnatural to him. He lifted it from the table and carried it to the car as fast as he could. He set it on the front seat. His grandmother came out of the house as he started to get into the back seat. "No, Teddy, sit in front with me and the dog. There's plenty of room." As usual, Theodore obeyed. He moved the stuffed dog over on the seat toward his grandmother. They were silent on the drive to the cemetery. Mrs. Heathcote seemed wrapped up in memories, and Theodore found the whole situation too ridiculous to talk about. He wondered if his grandmother was going batty. They arrived, and Mrs. Heathcote stopped the car near her husband's grave. "Teddy, Theodore, bring the dog now." Theodore picked up the dog again. Its face stared up at him, the mouth fixed in that awful snarl. Following his grandmother's directions, Theodore lay the dog on top of his grandfather's grave. He asked to be excused then. He wanted to get away from his grandmother and the dog, and the creepy feeling he had from being around them. After a half hour of walking around the cemetery, Theodore came back to his grandfather's grave. His grandmother's eyes were red and swollen from crying, but her face was beaming with a smile. "Isn't it so lovely, Teddy, seeing the two together again like that?" Theodore tried to hide the disgust on his face as he looked at the stuffed dog lying on the grave. "Is it time to go now?" he asked. "Yes, dear. Bring the dog back to the car." Theodore bent down and picked up the dog. Then he let it fall back onto the grave. "Theodore, what is wrong with you?" Mrs. Heathcote asked angrily. But Theodore didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to tell her that the dog seemed warm now, as if it were alive. He fought the sickening disgust that he felt and stooped down to pick it up again. Yes, the dog was warm. After he got the dog back into the car, Theodore went into the back seat and refused to move up front. During the ride home, all he could think of was having to pick the dog up again. When they arrived home, Theodore gritted his teeth and carried the dog into the house. He never looked at the animal. He set it down in the study and rushed out of the room. Mrs. Heathcote watched him, shaking her head. My, Theodore, you certainly are acting strange today. You young people haven't any sense, do you? Theodore wanted to leave his grandmother's house, but he had no choice. His mother had promised he would stay overnight. Theodore vowed never to go into that study again. He passed the afternoon reading. While he was eating his grandmother's delicious supper, he was almost happy he had stayed. The two of them settled down to play checkers after the dishes were washed. They played for 2 hours. Theodore even let his grandmother win one game. "You've tired me out, Theodore," Mrs. Heathcote declared sleepily after losing for the 15th time. "Be a good boy and fetch the matches from the mantel in the study. I want to light a candle in your room tonight. I want it to be just like when your mother was little." Mrs. Heathcote began her slow walk up the stairs to the bedrooms. "Bring the matches up when you come to bed, Teddy." Theodore looked around the living room for a pack of matches, but he couldn't find any. There weren't any matches in the kitchen drawers either. Finally, he walked up to the study door. He opened it and looked inside. It was too dark to see anything, even the dog. He decided to get the matches without turning the light on. He knew exactly where the mantel was in the room. He slipped inside and felt along the wall until his hand reached the mantel. His fingers closed around the matchbox. Just then, he thought he heard a noise from the corner of the room. A noise like a growl. Theodore struck one of the matches against the box. In the burst of light from the match, he saw the dog's beady eyes looking at him. A wave of hatred came over Theodore. That cursed dog. With the match trembling in his hand, Theodore walked toward the stuffed dog. He looked at the fat jowls sagging around the cruel mouth. He stared into the beady eyes. As he came nearer to the dog, he saw its long whiskers. Theodore laughed and shoved the match into those ugly whiskers. Upstairs, Mrs. Heathcote was putting on her nightrobe when she heard the scream. It was a horrible, terrified scream. She rushed down the steps as fast as her old legs would carry her and hurried into the study. Theodore was lying on the floor. His face had a look of terror on it. His arms and legs were sticking out stiff from his body. "No, not again," Mrs. Heathcote panted as she ran to call the doctor. The doctor arrived within 10 minutes, but that didn't matter. Theodore was already dead. The doctor said there would have to be an autopsy. Mrs. Heathcote nodded in agreement. "He looks so much like my husband when he died," she said wistfully to herself. They carried Theodore out of the study, and once again, the room was left in darkness. Then, a low snarl came from the corner, and a drop of bloody saliva fell from the stuffed dog's mouth. It was after 2 o'clock in the morning in London, England. Dave and Tom were wandering through the streets like two sleepwalkers. They had inquired at hotel after hotel. None had vacancies. Now their footsteps echoed eerily through the empty, narrow streets of the city. "I thought London didn't have fogs anymore," Dave grumbled. During the last hour, a foggy mist had been settling over the city. It was getting difficult for them to see the hotel signs, and harder yet to see the street signs. "I've got to find some place to lie down," Tom moaned. "I don't care where. I can't go any further." But go on they did, straining their eyes through the fog to find a place to stay. They walked from Piccadilly Circus to Green Park. Then they headed north to Oxford Street with old 4-story buildings. They saw a sign. It was hanging on the black iron fence in front of the building. "For sale," it read. "Listen, I've got an idea," Tom said. "This place is probably vacant. What do you say we break in and sleep for the night?" "I'm ready to try anything," Dave answered. The iron fence was topped with sharp spikes. The two climbed over the fence carefully, putting their feet on the iron crossbars and then leaping over the spiked points. As tired as they were, it was quite the tricky thing to do. Once over the fence, they tiptoed up to the front of the building. Through one of the windows, they could see that the rooms were being remodeled. "It's empty, just as I thought," Tom whispered. "Yeah, but how are we going to get in?" Dave asked. Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out his Swiss Army knife. He wedged the knife between the top and bottom window and turned the old brass lock. Then he pushed the bottom section open. Tom looked at Dave with a smug grin of satisfaction. The two boys hoisted themselves up onto the window ledge and then climbed into the room. "I don't want to sleep here," Dave said, looking around. "Too many nails and tools lying around." "Okay," Tom said. "Let's check out the other rooms." They went out into the hallway of the old house, where the cramped staircase twisted upwards. Tom started up and Dave followed. On the second floor, they tried the doors on all the rooms. Everything was bolted. Then they climbed up to the third floor. But again, every door was bolted shut. "Looks like there's one more floor," Tom said, looking up the staircase. "Let's go." They wearily trudged up the final flight of stairs. Dave was starting to complain again about being tired. On the top landing, there was only one door. The roof slanted steeply in on all sides. Tom tried the doorknob, and to his relief, it opened. The two boys entered the small room. In it were 2 single beds and a dresser. A window overlooked the street below. "Not bad," Tom said. He walked over to a stand and lit the candle that stood on it. Dave fell down on one of the old beds in exhaustion. Just then, a loud bang echoed up the staircase from below them. Dave jumped up. "What was that?" Tom crept out into the hallway and stood there for a minute. Then he came back into the room. "I think the window just fell shut. We forgot to close it after us, didn't we?" "Oh, yeah," Dave said, sitting down on one of the beds again. "This place really gives me the creeps, though." "Come on," Tom said. "It's a free place to sleep, isn't it?" They both lay down on the beds. Tom lit a cigarette and then reached over and blew out the candle. As the light was extinguished, A weird cackle, almost like a laugh, seemed to come from the ceiling. "Was that you, Tom?" Dave asked, sitting up in his bed. "No," Tom said, his voice uneasy. "I think it was something on the roof. Maybe we should get out of here, don't you think?" Dave asked. "And go where?" Tom leaned back down in his bed. They were both quiet for a while. "I mean, maybe this place is haunted or something," Dave said in the darkness. "Just be quiet and go to sleep," Tom said. Dave stopped talking, but then something else broke the silence. It was the sound of feet moving up and down the staircase, but the feet were moving faster than any human feet ever could. The footsteps seemed to slide, to slither, to glide up and down the stairs. "I want to get out of here," Dave insisted in a panicked voice. "Okay, let's go." Tom jumped out of bed and lit the candle. Just then, doors started slamming downstairs, the doors that had been locked before, and that weird cackling sound came again, this time from the hallway. "I'm afraid to go out there now," Dave said to Tom. He looked scared. "Yeah, maybe we better stay in here." Tom walked over to the door. There was an iron bolt on it. He slid the bolt across the doorframe. "Nobody's getting in through here." Tom went back and sat down on his bed. He tried to avoid Dave's eyes. He could tell that Dave was freaking out. He didn't feel so brave himself. "Listen, we're okay," he said. There was a rattling sound from the door. The two boys' eyes were fixed on the doorknob. It was moving back and forth. "No, no, 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 no." Dave was shaking in fright on his bed. "At least the bolt is there," Tom said. But then, by its own will it seemed, the bolt slid back from the doorframe. The two boys watched with horror as the door slowly, ever so slowly, moved open. After a few inches, it stopped. There was a dead silence. Then, the cackle, that weird, sick cackling, penetrated the room. And through the narrow opening in the door, a shapeless green blob began to ooze. Dave was frozen against the wall at the head of his bed. Tom jumped up and stood in a corner. More of the blob oozed in. It was like slimy green jelly, and it smelled of evil. Then, suddenly a head appeared out of the green ooze. It had a horrible face, a face covered with knife wounds. The cackle came from this face. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the head disappeared back into the green blob. On the bed, Dave was making choking sounds in his throat. He was trying to scream, but couldn't. The blob oozed through the air toward him. It seemed drawn on by his fear. Standing in the corner, Tom saw his chance to escape. He moved slowly against the wall until he was near the door. Then he ran for it. As he passed near the blob, he felt something cold and slimy swish along his arm. He turned back to see Dave's face staring at him. It had the look of death on it. Tom ran harder. He almost fell down the steps in the front room. The window there, the window they had climbed in, was still open. He jumped out of it. Then he hurled himself across the spiked fence. On the street, he looked up at the attic room. He couldn't see anything, but that weird cackling floated down to him. Tom didn't know what to do. He ran into the foggy street. He stopped for a moment. Then, behind him, he heard Dave scream in agony. Tom started running again. He ran until he came to St. James Park. Then he still kept running and running. News report dated the 21st of June. Early this morning, police found the body of 18-year-old Dave Moore impaled on the spiked fence in front of 50 Berkeley Square. The fourth-story window of the house was gaping open. Homicide detectives believe the young American was pushed from the small attic room. His traveling companion, 18-year-old Tom Dodd, is being sought for questioning. Although 50 Berkeley Square has long been known as a haunted house, the homicide squad told reporters that Scotland Yard does not believe in ghosts.